something a security, because last time I checked, market making doesn't deem something a security. Market making is more something that the Department of Justice, so to speak, would have to step in on, right? The SEC doesn't actually have grounds to deem any asset a security based off market making. They can deem it, in a sense, back to the flush address. But again, how do you determine who is in control of the flush address for those types of things? Okay, and then you look back at, say, for instance, the Hex OA. Well, the Hex OA never sold a coin. The flush address never sold a coin, right? So it wasn't arbitraging the ratio difference between the adoption amplifier and Uniswap V1 to make profit, right? It wasn't doing that to extract value. It was acting in a sense of, hey, I'm going to fix this problem that I see out here so people don't get wrecked, right? So it acted in good faith. It didn't sell any coins, and nobody really knows who owns the keys for it. And to this day, it didn't sell any coins. So what actually deems assets securities, right? So you can sit there and play the game of where'd the ETH go all day long, right? But they're just the facts of where did the ETH go, right? So where you want to speculate off that and what you can actually base a fact on is very minuscule. So you can't criminally charge somebody and you can't base anything without facts. So those are the only facts that exist, and the blockchain shows, the digital ledger of that happening. Okay, but anything else isn't a fact. It's just hearsay and it's speculation. So to sit there and speculate is just crazy, right? But then before I move on, go back to 2019 and 2022, right, when the adoption amplifier was going. Richard Hart said the same things on stream that he says about Pulsechain, right? He literally said back in 2020, early 2020 on stream, that flush address you have no expectations of. If you put ETH into the adoption amplifier, your ETH is gone. Like, you do not have any expectations when somebody presses that public call function to flush the ETH out of the Hex contract into that flush address. You have no expectations of profit. You have no expectations of where that ETH goes or what happens to that ETH. Your ETH is gone, right? He sat there and said it on stream. And one of the things that you cannot question Richard about is his transparency. So back then, he said the same words that he says now, right? Nothing changed. So you have no expectations of profit from the work of others. Okay, nobody had expectations of where did the ETH go. It was just people fighting about where did the ETH go, because that was one of the main critical points that they could find as a FUD scenario for Hex. Okay, but again, no expectations. No expectations is constantly taken out of context itself. Okay, so no expectations from the work of others is more in relation to managerial and entrepreneurial efforts for an asset. So again, when Hex was launched, it didn't pay for a centralized exchange listing. That is a managerial and entrepreneurial effort for an asset which would deem it a security. Hex didn't have that. So when Hex was being designed, it was being designed 2 years before it launched. It took 2 years to build Hex, right? So Hex was starting to get developed back in 2017, and it took until 2019 to launch it. So back in 2017, Richard Hart started studying the SEC, and he built a token around securities. You have a man that sat on YouTube, right, and told you about no expectations, sat there and said, Hex is not a security because I didn't pay for centralized exchange listings. You have no expectations of the work of others. You have no expectations of a flush address. And you have no expectations of me. I will not work for you. I do nothing for you. You interact with a contract if you want to play in the adoption amplifier. You claim your own rewards. If you're a Bitcoin holder, you claim your Hex. You sign a transaction like showing that you own that Bitcoin address, right? And then you can claim your rewards. Nothing was done through any type of central entity. Nothing was done through anything that linked back to him. Nothing was done through anything that wasn't decentralized. It was completely launched decentralized, right? So Hex launched differently to everybody else. And you're talking about a man that studied the SEC and how to launch a cryptocurrency truly decentralized to fail the Howey test back in 2017. Okay, so that was never done before. Okay, so you got to remember that when you constantly start looking at Richard Hart and moving forward from here. Back in 2017, he started studying the SEC, right? He started studying assets on how to deploy them, how to launch them, and how to not be deemed a security. Okay, so failing the Howey test. It failed it the day that it launched, right? You couldn't claim it to be a security back then. Where did the ETH go? Again, have fun speculating that. I told you the facts of what happened with it. The flush address is on the blockchain. You can go back and do whatever you want with it. And then moving up the timeline, you met Richard Hart starting to do outrage marketing, right? Outrage marketing is not managerial or entrepreneurial efforts to deem you a security. So when you look at the Howey test, right, one thing that will deem you a security is if you put your money into a common pool with the expectations of work of others. Okay, so that's, say, for instance, you put money into a asset and that asset promises you that they will do a bunch of marketing for you. That asset promises that they will get centralized exchange listings for you. You know, maybe that DAO, for instance, promises that it will use those money that goes into that DAO to go do these things, right? None of that was ever promised. But there is things off to the side of the Howey test that the SEC added on, which is managerial and entrepreneurial efforts. So if you go pay for centralized exchange listings, so to speak, right, that is a managerial effort of you putting forward capital, right, to promote your product, to get it listed. You're being an entrepreneur for your asset that you founded, right? That deems something a security based off what the SEC has written around their regulations. Okay, again, I'm not a lawyer. That's just what's written around off to the side. So Richard doesn't do anything, okay? He's never paid for a centralized exchange listing. He sits there and debates. He says what an asset could do. He tells you about what Hex can do, what it was designed for, and everything around it. But nobody can show you any point in time where Richard went and did something that could be deemed a managerial and an entrepreneurial effort to promote Hex. Okay, that doesn't exist. So for that sake, again, he fails the Howey test. Hex fails the Howey test.